Welcome to an unexpected QAV event this week, recording this on Tuesday, the 25th of April, 2023. I'm in Brisbane. TK's in Toronto, where I wasn't expecting to hear from him for a couple of weeks, but he surprised me with his presence like Jesus just popped in all of a sudden, like, oh, I'm here. How are you, TK?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. No, I thought we had planned last week to do one this week at the same time.
Go. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm clear and free, so let's go.
That's good. So, how's the last bit of the travel been going?
Yeah, good. We had a couple of nights and days in New Orleans before this. Now I'm in Toronto with Jenny and Alex, who've arrived, which is good. Haven't seen them for nearly a month, so that's great. And Roddy and I had time before New Orleans in a place called Amelia Island, just outside of Jacksonville in Florida, which was good. Yeah.
Wow. And tell me about the highlight.
Redneck Riviera.
I saw your photo of on the beach, Redneck Riviera. Tell me about the highlights of New Orleans. Did you do anything fun there?
I think it's probably better to talk about the lowlights. I mean, I absolutely hated the French Quarter there. It was just full of people, really touristy, hard to get around. And then you sort of went one street away and it was like boarded up places and you didn't feel safe. So I highly recommend people don't go to New Orleans for the French Quarter, which is the tourist attraction, Bourbon Street and all that. But we jumped on the bus and saw the rest of New Orleans and then went to other parts outside of the French Quarter, and it was a lovely town, beautiful town.
Well, it's been, I think, as I said last week, it's been probably 20 years since I've been in New Orleans, but I used to love the French Quarter. I mean, yeah, it's very touristy, it's true, but I love once you got off Bourbon Street and you went out to, some of the other like blocks, we hit like a few blues clubs and jazz clubs. But I do remember being there once, putting my headphones on, just sort of walking, listening to, I don't know, music or something. It was before the era of podcasts. And then all of a sudden just thinking, I haven't been paying attention to where I was. And I was the only white guy and people were giving me this look like, I think one guy said to me, "You must be lost, boy," or something like that. I was like, yeah, I am. Sorry.
Yeah, we didn't feel safe in some places of it, so we got out of there quick. But outside of the French Quarter, it was fine. It was really nice, clean, cruisy sort of place with good restaurants and bars and things. So, yeah.
Did you see any blues, any jazz? What?
No. Well, there's nothing. Well, literally nothing in the French Quarter.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And then there was one street that the tourist bus guide said this is where the music is, but it just looked really touristy as well.
It's changed a lot. And, as I said last time,
I don't know if we were there during spring break or what, but it was full of frat boys and hens nights and thousands of people just milling about, doing nothing, getting in the way. It was just awful.
Not your speed?
No.
No women flashing their breasts when people threw them chains of beads from balconies?
Oh, is that what that's about? No, well, there wasn't. There was people throwing beads from balconies, but it just seemed to be, getting the young boys to fight each other to get them.
No, you're supposed to flash your boobs if somebody throws you a chain of beads.
Ah, okay. No, that wasn't going on.
I flashed mine a couple of times when I was there. Didn't really get the reaction that I'd hoped for. Anyway, well, that's disappointing. You've been paying attention to investing?
I have today. I've had a bit of time to go over things today.
Well, I haven't because I wasn't planning on doing a show with you this week, so I've got really nothing to talk about. We've got a couple of questions that we'll get into. I guess I can do a portfolio update. The market was tracking along quite nicely for a few days then again last week, and then they must have worked out that you were coming back soon and everything sort of took a turn for the worst at one point there, but let's see where we are.
Is that because Tucker Carlson left Fox News or something like that? Or?
I saw that in the New York Times this morning.
Yeah,
I did have to wonder how he had any credibility left with the audience after all of the revelations came out from the Dominion case, that he was secretly
that was
didn't
a good
believe
that
anything
was
that
a
he
good
said.
investment for the private equity people who paid $28 million for Dominion 4 years ago, and then made $780 million US in 4 years.
Well, they haven't sold it, but yeah, I'm not sure where that money goes that they got from the settlement, but I'm sure some of it will get back to them, and maybe a special dividend or something. Wasn't it to make up for lost revenue for the business for the last few years?
Oh, it's meant to be, yeah, but it's an outsized payment. And then the second one's coming, which is they're talking about not settling. So
Smartmatic or whatever it is.
yeah, yep.
Well, portfolio report since inception, we're up 18.61% CAGR per annum, according to Navexa, versus the STW up 7.42% per annum over that time. So that's pretty good. What are we, nearly a month into this quarter? This quarter, we're up 4.57% per annum versus the STW up 2.02%. So, we're having a good quarter vis-a-vis the benchmark. This financial year, we're up 15.7% per annum versus the STW up 16.81%. So we've nearly caught up to the benchmark for the financial year. We've still got a few months left to go, and we're outperforming it so far this quarter, which is fascinating because, going back to November last year, we were at 3.2% versus the STW at 13.4%. We were underperforming quite dramatically, and we have nearly caught up. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's just swings and roundabouts, really, isn't it, in the short term? The market, I think, had one of the best Januaries ever, and now it's come off again since then.
I mean, we're probably not going to get double market this financial year, but if we just match the benchmark, I'll be happy, because not many fund managers, not many investors are able to even meet the benchmark. Considering
well, not just that, it's been a very topsy-turvy year. It's been a very turbulent year. So to get 12% or whatever it was you said before we're getting is pretty good.
15.7 for this financial
15.7, there you go. Yeah.
Wow. And again, as we've found the last couple of years, the breakdown of that, according to Navexa, capital gain is only 7.17%. Income return is 8.54%. So more than half of that is coming from dividends and, we don't have SK. Did we have SKT this year? It might have been the Sky. No, that's in the light portfolios. Hasn't even been in the dummy. They had this massive capital return that I know spiked one of our light portfolios, but that's not part of this. Let's look at the big ones for the dummy portfolio this financial year. LAU up 224% so far.
Yeah, it's good.
RSG up 35, SMR, my accidental buy, up 46, TRS up 33, Woodside up 24, CLX up 36, CVL up 32, DUR up 41, IGL up 55. Yeah, so a lot of them have done well, but LAU, what a corker that's been.
There must be some big dividend payers in there, though, to have an 8% dividend yield.
Yeah, so
maybe the coal stocks, I would have thought.
Well, Lindsay, LAU, 9% income return on that. But the share price has, been very good as well. But yeah, we've done quite well out of a couple of dividends from them. One in October and one in April that were both quite good. But yeah, I don't know the breakdown for the rest of it. I don't know how to. Well, yeah, let's see. Good dividends this financial year from AMO, ASG, BFG, BRI, CVL, FEX, big one from FEX, IGL, KOV, KSC, LAU, Myer. Myer's actually hasn't done very well from a capital gain perspective. It's down 12%, but nice dividend sort of neutralized a lot of that. And they still haven't paid out. I think that doesn't pay out until like the 11th of May or something. The Maya dividend was crazy. Like the X date was in mid-March and the payment date's in May. It's one of those terrible ones, They just tell you, like in my alert spreadsheet, it's just, it's technically a Rule 1 sell, except for we're holding on to it because of the dividend,
Well, classic retailer to pay the invoice on the last day.
Yeah. They're on 90-day terms with paying their dividends. Anyway, so that's that portfolio doing good all in all. It's been sort of a touchy year, but right now it's looking pretty strong.
Yeah, good.
Well, do you have anything else you want to talk about in terms of news of the investing world this week, TK, or do we just get into some questions?
I guess just get into some questions. I don't really have any news of the investing world. All the news over here does, like I happened to turn on Bloomberg this morning because I was flicking through some channels and the headline was morning opening in Australia. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll turn it on. It was nice to see the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge in the background of the TV presenter, who then talked about the US market, nothing about Australia at all. So that was disappointing.
And of course, it's Anzac Day here today, and the market's closed anyway.
Right, because I did try and download the Fin Review before we went on air, and there was none. Yeah. Well, thanks for working on a public holiday, Cam.
There's no public holidays when you've run your own business, as I'm sure everyone who runs their own business knows. Yeah. Chrissy said to me, "Oh, you're not taking the day off," and I'm like, "Who's putting out the podcast if I take the day off?" ChatGPT's not doing it for me yet.
Yeah. You're holding down the fort there. Alex is over here with me. So you're doing this week. Yeah.
So speaking of which, I had to do the buy list yesterday, and I hadn't done a buy list for quite a while because I use Alex's every week. And she uses your sheet. If I do one, I use the Flitman model. And so, I had to grab data out of Alex's sheet. I had to grab data out of the work that Maxi does for us. I have a freelancer who does some analysis work for us each week, and she's out of New York. I have Chris Stratton, who's built his automated model that also cross-references the manual data that he pulls out of Stock Doctor, and we cross-reference that against Alex's call on the manual data each week. So I had 4 data sets and then I had the Stock Doctor data set that I had to pull into the Flitman model. And I needed to pull all of that data together and cross-reference it against each other and, and figure out one version of the truth for this. Normally, it would have taken me all day and broken my brain to do that. I just opened up GPT and I said, listen, I've got this problem. I need to integrate these data sets with these columns and this data. I need to compare this column to that, this column in this sheet to that column in that sheet. And if it agrees, I need this result. If it disagrees, I need that result. Blah, 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 blah. I spent half an hour writing all of my problems into English language, gave it to GPT, and it was like, sure, here's how you do it. Boom, 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 boom. Here's a formula for this. Here's a formula for that. Here's a formula for this. I implemented it and it bloody worked. And I tell you, it was insane how many problems it solved for me. I couldn't have got through yesterday without GPT. It absolutely saved my bacon yesterday without Alex. So I tell you, people, if you if you still think GPT is just a fancy chatbot, and you do anything that involves information work, you're missing out. It absolutely blew my mind again yesterday what it enabled me to do.
Yeah, well, as Ruddy calls it, chat GDP.
GDP. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so there you go. Thank you, GPT-4, for saving my bacon yet again yesterday. All right, well, let's get into the questions. First one is from John. Hi, John. In reference to share investing versus share trading on the ATO website, for tax purposes, which one does Tony use? And then he helpfully included a link to the ATO's website. And I know we've talked about this before over the years. And I replied to John, look, I'm pretty sure you classify yourself as a share investor as opposed to a share trader. And we talk about CGT implications of buying and selling all the time. But do you just want to talk about that a little bit for John's benefit, how you think of the difference and how the ATO thinks of the difference?
Yeah, sure. And I guess the disclaimer is this is not individual tax advice for John or for anyone else listening. So look it up yourself on the ATO website, but more importantly, talk to your tax accountant about it. So my understanding is that you can basically nominate which one you are yourself, and as long as you've done a reasonable number of trades during the year, you can nominate yourself as a share trader, or you can nominate yourself as a share investor. And the ATO, pretty much, from what I've been told, accepts that nomination. The difference being, if you're a share investor, you get the capital gains tax relief, which means if I hold a share for 12 months or more, then the capital gains tax is halved, which I think is fairly important. The other option is to be a share trader, which just treats it as normal sort of operating expenses and income, just like you do on your own PAYE tax form. So if you're investing in your own name and you make a capital gain, you'll pay whatever your top marginal rate is of tax on that, and you'll get no CGT relief. The dividends will be taxed at your top marginal rate as well. But if you're an investor, you do get the CGT relief after 12 months. That's probably the main difference. And certainly share trading would help some people if they're on a low marginal tax rate. And it gets to be sort of line ball if you're in, say, if you're operating through a company where the company tax rate is at the most 30%, and half of the top marginal rate's 27.5%. So it's, pretty close either way, really.
So what are the advantages of calling yourself a trader versus an investor then?
Yeah, you can, there's not a whole lot. You just treat it as an operating business. So you're conducting a business where your stock is shares and you're selling them and taking the income straight away to the P&L. Whereas as an investor, it's more like a balance sheet item, which is it's seen as an asset, and therefore you get capital gains tax relief. So it just depends on what investment structure you're using, what the tax rate is in that structure, and whether you want to get the deductions available for offset maybe against other income. Well, I guess that's the same both ways, but I've never seen an advantage in being a share trader versus being an investor, because you lose that CGT relief.
It sounds like you're saying that if you're a trader, you classify it as your source of income, whereas if you're an investor, it's a long-term wealth building exercise. Is that right?
Yeah, so one's seen as being a movement of assets, and one's seen as being operating income, like you're operating a coffee shop.
Yeah,
Instead of
right.
selling coffee, you're selling shares.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks for explaining that. Hope that helps, John. The only other question I have is from Daryl. He's asking for the latest view on using Renko charts. He says, in noticing the press lately about WHC returns and now their decision to go early on their mind expansion, I had a look at the charts, and looking back, in this case at least, following the Renko chart to sell would have given a much better outcome than the coal price sell. So he said Renko would have got him out at $8.50 to $9, whereas the coal price commodity sell would have kicked in around $7. And I said the last I heard, you were still thinking about Renko charts and testing it. Is that still where it's at?
Yeah, so Roddy did some analysis for me, and Roddy being Roddy gave it to me the day before we left for the States. So I had a chance to go through it today when I saw the question. Or actually, I saw the question on Facebook a couple of days ago whenever it was put on there. So I had pulled out Roddy's analysis. And I think the Renko charts are useful in situations like Whitehaven Coal, where we've had a big increase in the share price, and it's a long way away from its sell price. We've talked about this before. When do you sort of sell out? Do you wait till the sell price and give all your capital gains back, or do you sell out earlier? And Renko has you selling out earlier. And as Brett says, it's kind of like a moving stop loss. There's a mathematical formula behind it, which we could actually calculate and put into an alert, but it's probably just easier to look up the chart and work out when to sell. So Roddy's analysis actually showed that using Renko charts gave about a 10% better return than not using them. Now that's the first sort of a piece of analysis that he's done and I've looked at, and it was done way back. It was using the first time I did a transaction dump from the dummy portfolio, which I think was about a year or a year and a half in. So there's about a year and a half's worth of data in it. And then, so we know what the results are from not using Renko charts. And then Mark went back and did two things. He didn't buy a share that the dummy portfolio did if the Renko chart was red, so it was a sell. And he sold a share when the Renko chart went from green to red, which we may not have done in the dummy portfolio. Certainly probably wouldn't have done at the same time as the Renko chart turned to a sell. We used the 3-point trend lines. And so sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but overall it was a 10% better off result from using the Renko charts. So I think it's worth pursuing. My next plan would be for myself to set up a dummy portfolio and trade it using Renko charts, as well as all the other things we use. We don't change any of those, and give it maybe 6 months at least to see whether it turns out in real life to be better off than just the paper analysis we've done. And I think if we have 2 ticks for that, then I think we can implement it into the process.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So is the main. I think the main thing certainly will help in cases like the WHC case, where something's gone up a lot and it's a long way above its sell line. But it seemed to me, just from what I saw today, that it was also helping in not buying something that was still red on the Renko chart, even though it may have been passing all our other tests. In a lot of cases, they were still falling knives.
Mm. So you're going to implement that sort of Renko dummy portfolio, and you'll report.
Yeah, I'll just pick the next top 10 stocks in the buy list and put them into a dummy portfolio and trade them for 6 months or so and see how they go.
Oh, fascinating. All right. Well, good timing of that question, Daryl, and thanks to you and Ruddy for doing that analysis for us. It's interesting.
Yeah, and the other piece of analysis I also had time to go through today was Ryan's work on buying from the top of the buy list versus buying from the bottom of the buy list, and similar sort of results. So he did it differently. He went back through the history of all the buy lists that we've produced, and at least in their current form, that's about 2.5 years worth of buy lists, and picked I think it was about 10 or 12 at random, and then used the top 10 stocks on the buy list at that time and traded them forward. And it was a bit of work because he had to check the commodity charts and check for 3-point sells for those stocks. And then if they were a sell, to buy another one from a buy list at that sell time. So he's done a fair bit of manual work on it. But again, his results are interesting. They're showing that buying from the top of the buy list is better than buying from the bottom. And there was I think about 2 cases where it wasn't, and they were pretty recent ones. But in the main, it was buying from the top was better than buying from the bottom. So Dylan had done some work before Ryan to suggest that the QAV cutoff should be 0.2 rather than 0.1, and I think from what I've seen in Ryan's early results, that's probably going to be the case. So again, I'll set up a dummy portfolio for that and run it forward for 6 months and just see the difference in buying from the top versus buying from the bottom, and validate that going forward. And then if that works, then put that into practice as well. And that will come with limitations, because we may not be able to find 15 to 20 stocks with a QAV score above 0.2. So that's why I want to test it on paper first and get the kinks out from doing it live, or doing it live on a desktop anyway, going forward.
Did that factor in ADT cutoffs?
He did do a bit of analysis for me with he did buying the top 10 stocks on the buy list, buying the bottom 10 stocks on the buy list, and we chose 10 because when he bought 20, there was a big overlap because there wasn't enough stocks to separate them. So we did 10. And then he also did the top 10 with an ADT above, I think it was 100,000, either 100,000 or 500,000. So larger ADT stocks from the top, and they also perform better as well.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So higher ADT stocks perform better than lower ADT stocks.
Well, I think it was just because they were coming from the top of the buy list was the more important thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, good stuff. That's interesting. I love it when there's new ideas.
Yeah.
Speaking of new ideas, somebody asked me again yesterday when they can get their hands on the latest version of the Breadilator that we've been testing for quite a while now. The one with the second byline built into it. I know that the last email conversation we had about this was, I think before you went away, you said you were still testing it. That's still the status on that?
Oh, no, it's fine to go out. It's okay.
Cool.
Yeah, it looks good to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. I
Yeah.
will, I'll work with Brett. I'll shoot him an email after this and we'll get a public version of that ready. So cool. Thanks for that. And thank you to Brett Fisher for his constant work on the Breadilator. One other thing I forgot to mention at the upside at the beginning of the show was one of the things I decided doing the buy list yesterday is that steel was a sell. Have you looked at the steel chart?
I haven't. No, I haven't looked at the charts for a while.
It steel sort of plummeted this month, and I decided it was a sell, which had a material impact because we owned a lot of Blue Scope in the dummy portfolio and the light portfolio and in my super. So I had to sell a ton of Blue Scope yesterday and sold it all at a profit too, which was nice. But again, it was one of those indicators where I didn't look at the Renko though, but it was one of these indicators where the commodity sell got us out while the share price still looked, relatively healthy. Right. It hasn't started to turn down, I don't think, dramatically. I haven't looked today. Well, I didn't look at what happened to it yesterday after I dumped it, but
Hmm.
yeah, it came actually. It fell a lot yesterday. Yeah, I think a lot of people decided it was a sell. It opened at 21.39 and hit a low of 20.53 yesterday, stabilized around $20.70. But if it's been going up for the last 6 months. Yeah, year to date, it's up. Go back a year ago, it was trading at $16.76. It's now trading about $20.64. Apart from a bit of a fall yesterday, it had a bit of a drop. What was that? On the 20th of April, it started coming back. It has come back a little bit, I guess, in the last week. But yeah, anyway, our commodity sell got us out of Blue Scope. So we'll see how that works for us. But just an FYI for people, if they didn't notice that in the buy list yesterday, I think steel is a sell. Check it for yourself, obviously. See what you think. But looked like a sell to me.
Very good.
Well, that's it. I've run out of things to talk about.
Oh, I got a pulled pork ready.
Oh, I forgot. You got a pulled pork.
Yeah.
Nice. We should have done that before the Q&A. What are you doing for the pulled pork this week, Tony?
Oh, National Australia Bank. I think someone asked for one last week on the highest ADT stock that was new to the buy list from memory.
Yeah, great. All right, well, go do that then.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, just as an aside, can you hear there's a truck outside the window of the hotel? Can you hear that?
No, I can't, but I did mean to ask you where you're staying. It looks like a very nice... You don't have your house in Toronto anymore, right? You sold that?
No. We're staying in a nice hotel, the Windsor Arms, which is lovely.
It's hard to tell the difference between a hotel and your houses because your houses look like hotels, fancy hotels usually, except there's no Dale Chihuly glasswork or anything in there. So nice hotel.
We saw that in Vegas.
Oh, yeah, it's still at the Bellagio?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the ceiling, whatever. The more coming down out of the ceiling, yeah.
Yes.
They were there when Chrissy and I got married 12 years ago at the Bellagio. That installation was there way back then, so must be a permanent fixture, huh?
Oh, it would have to cost millions and millions of dollars, so I guess it would be.
Yeah. All right. No,
we do
I can't hear the truck.
We do have a Chihuly print or painting in our place in Sydney.
Yeah, you do. Very nice.
All
right.
Pull pork on. Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would think all the listeners would know National Australia Bank. It's one of the big four banks in Australia. The big four banks in Australia tend to have strengths and weaknesses in different areas, and NAB's strength is in business banking. So less so in mortgages, a little bit in credit cards. They have a bank in New Zealand, but it's your vanilla sort of mortgage lender. And in NAB's case, business lender as well. That's its strength. And also wealth. So they bought one of the old stockbrokers in Melbourne, JB Weir, a little while ago. And so that's enabled them to have links into high net worth individuals and home offices and things like that. So they're their NAB strengths, but otherwise it's much like the other big four banks. It's run by a guy called Ross McEwen, who's very well regarded. I tend to think probably one of the best CEOs in the banking space. And also the chairman is an experienced banker by the name of Phil Cronican, who's also highly regarded. So I think the bank's well managed at the moment. It does come with a risk in that there has been a bit of talk around town that Ross McEwen may decide to resign or retire. And the reason for that is that when he took the job, he came across from the UK. He is an Australian, but he'd been over in the UK fixing up banks after the GFC and came back to run NAB, but said he'd do it for 5 years. And that time, I think, is in its last year now. And so there's speculation about who will take over and what it might mean for NAB. So that is a risk. CEO changeovers, even when they're well managed, and I think with someone like Phil Cronican in the chair, whatever happens will be well managed. And of course, Ross McEwen may decide to extend. He won't be tied to his initial forecast of a 5-year term if it suits him. So I think it's a risk. There's always a risk if when a new CEO comes in that they might clear the deck, so to speak, and write things down, which depresses the share price. And that's usually for two reasons. One, to reset the floor for all their options going forward off a low base. And secondly, it's probably their only time to do it during their tenure as CEO, because if you don't clear the decks when you start and take down all the provisions you need to, then it's pretty hard to do later on because it will affect the share price. So there is a risk that may happen, but it's we don't know. It's only a risk, I guess. And I'm kind of leaning towards the side with Cronican as chairman that it will be well managed, whatever happens. Anyway, that's the first risk. I guess the other thing to talk about with the big four banks in particular is interest rates. So interest rates are going up, as we all know. And the banks in these kind of high interest rates or rising interest rates times make more money than when interest rates are lower out of mortgages anyway, because they raise the rates quickly and they don't raise the rates on deposits equally as quickly or to the same extent. So their margins improve when interest rates are rising. But I guess the risks at the moment are that if interest rates rise too much and tip the country into recession, then the banks are going to face more mortgage defaults, which is also a bad thing for banks. And one of the biggest indicators of how well the banking sector is how much they are providing on their balance sheets for bad and doubtful debts. And they're not providing as much as they have been in the past at the moment. But if we do look like going into recession, they'll start putting away money to cover their losses for people who default on their mortgages, and that will be a material impact on their profits. So that's potentially a risk as well. And then the other risk is that we may be at peak interest rates for this cycle. If we're not there, we're close to it. The RBA didn't put interest rates up this month. They're calling it a pause, but there are signs inflation may be nearing its peak and might even be coming down. So if interest rates start to go down again, then that kind of margin increase for the banks is over and they'll start to reduce their margins. And I guess if interest rates get very low again, then they're going to have to do what they did in the past and look for other ways to grow their bottom lines. And they've just all now exited out of insurance and wealth. I guess were the two main adjunct businesses they got into when interest rates were low. And they may start looking at things like that again, which comes with risk. And they may also start looking overseas, which has never been a profitable hunting ground for Australian banks for a whole variety of reasons, least of which is that, particularly in the US, mortgages don't work the same, retail mortgages don't work the same way as they do in Australia. And the Australian CEOs don't have experience with that kind of that market in the way they do in Australia. So, there's risks, I guess, in the big four banks at the moment, but that's one of the reasons why NAB is on the buy list. It's a big, strong company with lots of institutional investors, lots of analysts looking at it, and yet it pops up on our value screen. So I think the reason for that is because people are factoring in some of these risks into the share price. So that's, good for us. When the price is right, I'm happy to take on that risk. And so, NAB's on the buy list, and there's no reason, I think, not to buy it, given all the risks above I've just spoken about. In terms of the numbers, like I said, it's a very large ADT stock. It's $131 million on average traded per day, so it's quite large. I'm using a share price of 28.46 in my analysis, which is roughly about what it traded at yesterday. It's less than consensus target, but it is above IV1 and just above IV2. And it's also greater than book plus 30%. So even though It's on our value buy list. It doesn't pass any of those value metrics. The one that does pass with flying colours is prop cap. So price to operating cash flow was about 3 times for this bank, which is quite low. Stock Doctor rate NAB a star income stock, which we score as 0.5 point. So it's a different rating to a star growth stock, which we give a full point to. This is the way that Stock Doctor rates companies which are suitable for people who want dividends and income rather than necessarily growth. The yield on NAB is 5.31%, so it's quite a high yielding stock, but again, doesn't pass our test because it is yielding lower than the average of the mortgage rates out there in the market. Just again, slightly lower. And it's interesting thing with NAB, I think, is that it keeps scoring just below our thresholds for IV2, book plus 30% and dividend yield, which again, I think is probably due to the fact that it's such a highly traded stock with lots of people focusing on it and investing in it. So I wouldn't expect it to be materially over any of our normal sort of benchmarks, and if that's the case. Forecast growth is for EPS is 16%, which again is good, nice and strong, but doesn't score for our growth over PE target, which we want 1.5 to score a 1, and this is 1.21. So again, a good solid score, but just below our cutoff for a rating. Financial health in Stock Doctor is strong and steady. The PE is 13.1, which isn't too bad, and it's below the market average, I would have thought. But it's not quite the lowest of the last 5 halves. So it's 3 years before it had a lower PE. So I think potentially when we roll around into the next half, it will score on that metric. It has had a recent upturn, so it's back on the buy list, which is why we're talking about it. So it scores for that, but 0 for consistently increasing equity. So in the last year in particular, equity has reduced slightly. So all in all, if I add up the numbers, the quality score is 8.5 out of 16, which is 53%. And the QAV is 0.17, which is reasonable, but not quite at the top of the buy list. And I guess the other thing to note about NAB is it's the only big 4 bank on our buy list currently, if you exclude Macquarie, which is the 5th bank, which is higher on the list. But NAB is our big 4 bank on the buy list at the moment.
Thanks, Tony. Your scores are a little bit different to what I got yesterday. I gave it 63% and 0.20, but close enough.
Yeah,
and it's also at a different share price too. It was 28.77 when I did it.
Yeah, I just have a look at the score, manually enter score for PE. So I went back and checked it, and the spreadsheet, the download, I think the last one that Alex did had it scoring as a 1, but I think it's a 0. That was the difference, I think, in those 2 scores.
Right. Yeah, I checked all of mine against Chris's automated report yesterday, so it should be right. But I can't remember. I can look it up actually. But
yeah, have a look in Stock Doctor. I'm pretty sure that the 6th PE in the past was about 7 from memory.
Record low PEs. I gave it a -1. What did you give it?
I gave it a 0.
Yeah, okay.
So -1 would be the case if it was the highest PE in the last 3 years. So I get
oh yeah.
I get PE currently at 13.11.
Yeah.
And the last 6 before that were 14.1 in September, 15.5 in March, 15.7 in September 21, 17.18 March 21, 13.82 September 20, and then 7.74 in March 20. So that's the one that's lower, and that's 6 PEs ago.
I'll have to drill down into the Stratton report and see why that didn't get picked up yesterday.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for that. NAB. Yeah, they are looking at the share price, and I did buy some NAB recently, but the share price has been sort of a little bit topsy-turvy over the last year. A year ago, it was trading around 32.74. It's currently trading at 29-ish today, 28.79 when it closed yesterday. But it's, it's kind of had some peaks and troughs there, down as low as 25.92 in May last year. Not exactly like a very consistent looking chart, but it's done really well in the last month, gone from 27.
Yeah, I think that's the case with the banks since the interest rates started rising. No one can kind of work out whether it's good or bad. On the one
Right.
hand, it's because the bank margins increase, but on the other hand, it's bad. Interest rates have risen so quickly that we could go into recession, which will hurt the banks. So it has been a topsy-turvy year for the big four banks.
And even if I look at the 5-year chart on NAB, 5 years ago it was trading at $28.59. Today it's at $28.79. So, apart from the COVID cough when it dropped down to $15, it really hasn't done anything in 5 years. So, blue chip stock, you don't really expect a lot of growth out of them, but this is like, actually, God damn it, go back 10 years and it was trading at $32.10 10 years ago. So it's pretty much done nothing in 10 years apart from
it's basically giving you dividend yield only for the last long period of time. Yeah.
So why would we even buy it?
Yeah, I think for me, the Ross McEwen story, I think, is a good story. I think he's a good CEO, well experienced, well credentialed. I think if anyone's going to make a change to NAB, he will. That's the first thing, and the second thing is, if interest rates don't cause a recession, then banks should do well.
Yeah, okay. So with him and the business conditions, it might do well as a business, but its share price in 10 years has gone nowhere. You think there is still potential for upside in the share price with all of those things?
We're playing the forecasting game, right? You and I don't know enough about banks to accurately predict where they're going to go. I just like the price and the fact that it's well run. So, it scores reasonably well on quality and it scores reasonably well on price. So, it's
so trust the
like you
numbers
say,
and
it's a
don't
big
think too
company.
hard.
It may have gone sideways for a long time. It might be about to have its day in the sun.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I mean, I've talked about this recently on the show. Just trust the numbers and don't get involved.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also a bit of an old saying about buying the cheapest bank out of the big four, and you can't go wrong because they tend to regress to the mean. Even though NAB's been going sideways for 10 years, it will one day get patched up and shine a bit. So, yeah.
But, if the numbers tell us to buy it, we buy it and, shut up and trust the system.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, we sell it. You use the system to sell it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for taking us through that. Got anything else you want to share with the punters? How are your horses doing?
Oh, really good. Cast had a great win last weekend. So, we had Miss Dunsford, didn't run well in New Zealand. I don't think she's handling the heavy tracks over there. So I think she'll be retired. We've been talking to the other owners about retiring her to the breeding barn. But Cast, it was a great win. She won a listed race in Adelaide and knocked off the favourite, which was good to see. And she'll race Saturday week in a Group 3 in Adelaide, or maybe a Group 2. So she's sort of slowly moving her way up the ladder towards Group 1 and becoming more and more valuable as she goes. So that was a great win.
Right. Congratulations. What's a heavy track?
Very wet. So it's a bob muddy sort of track, which is typical for New Zealand. That was the risk in sending her over there. but they've just been boggy and muddy the whole time, which hasn't suited her. But she has placed a couple of times in Group 3 races, so she'll be a valuable broodmare going forward as well.
Which is industry slang for glue factory. Right?
No, it's not industry. No, not at all. No, she'll be producing fillies and colts to go to the sales to race by other owners going forward.
Okay. What else have you been? Have you been doing anything else after hours stuff you want to talk about? Watching anything?
No, I mean we've just been going out for dinners and checking out the local bars and scenes and trying to find some live music, and haven't been that successful. So I haven't had much time to watch TV or anything. I guess the big thing for me over here is or in the US anyway, was just how different it is to Australia. I mean, the news, I don't know if it's been reported over there, but the big news was about the abortion pill and the Texas judge that Trump appointed to the federal court, who used his vast array of scientific knowledge to say the FDA should not have approved the abortion pill drug 20 years ago, and he was going to therefore disallow its use in the US, and that went straight to the Supreme Court on appeal, and they've delayed twice last week coming down with their ruling. And my guess is that they would love to uphold the Texas judge's anti-abortion stance, but they're going, this guy's fucking nuts. How the hell are we going to find a legal backing for a judge saying he knows more about the science of approving medicines than the FDA does? So I think they're hunting around trying to find a way to uphold his ruling, but that's just my summation.
Well, my understanding is that it doesn't have anything to do with the science. It's about constitutionally, how does this track? Are they allowed to allow certain things under the Constitution or not? Not whether or not it's good science.
Yeah, so the federal court judge did. I think he's based his ruling on the fact that the FDA got it wrong when they approved it. That was the legal case that he ruled on. And the Supreme Court should just be hearing constitutional issues. So, it's an interesting case legally, I guess, right. But it's devastating from a woman's point of view if it gets upheld by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, Chrissy's like constantly going on about how horrified she is about what's happening in her country of birth, particularly for her friends and nieces and sisters and everyone over there, all of the women that she knows and loves that are living in that country, and how it's basically becoming a sort of Islamic State fundamentalist religious theocracy. I saw the bills that the Republicans have passed in Florida too. Did you catch that yesterday? The 3 bills, including one where any parents that seek any kind of trans-related healthcare options for their children can have their children taken away from them by the state.
Wow.
I think it's not law yet. It's a bill, though, that has been approved by the Republicans in Florida. So it'll go through the process of seeing whether or not they can get it enacted as law. But it's just, fascinating and crazy.
Yeah, well, we drove across from Jacksonville to New Orleans, which was about an 8-hour drive, and a number of billboards, very confronting billboards, which were anti-abortion, was just incredible.
I saw a poster the other day from the US that somebody had put up on Facebook or something, which said, "They got you fighting a culture war so you won't fight a class war." And I think that's pretty much on the money. Get the people fighting each other over these issues so they don't get their pitchforks and torches and go after the white rich people that are keeping them broke. raping and
Yeah, I
pillaging.
think there's something in that, but I mean, this is a very important issue anyway. I think it's yeah, I mean, it's a very important one for women's rights in the States. And you probably wouldn't have been following, well, yeah, I know you wouldn't have been following the golf world, but there's a live tournament was in Adelaide last Saturday and Sunday, and that's divided the golf world because that's backed by the Saudi Arabian, what do you call it, the Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the Masters, there were some live players playing at the Masters because it's not part of the normal PGA schedule. And we sat next to people who would clap players who weren't live and then would be silent during live, and they were vehement against the live players. And like I'm talking with them, oh yeah, why is that? Well, it's backed by the Saudi government. Oh, what's wrong with the Saudi government? Oh, they're anti-women's rights. And I'm like, oh, so you can get an abortion now in Georgia, can you? Dead silence. It's like,
Yeah, you shit stirrer.
there's no self-awareness at all.
Yeah. And not to mention the fact that the US government has, propped up the Saudi government and vice versa for 60 years,
Yeah,
Been
and
partners
trades
in crime.
and does a lot of trade with the Saudi government too.
Yeah. And, Nixon and Kissinger basically came up with the open door weapons policy during the OPEC crisis in the 70s is basically, listen, if you keep petroleum prices down, we'll basically support you carte blanche militarily for anything you need. That was the deal that they did in the OPEC crisis, and it's remained in place to this very day. Saudi Arabia can buy whatever the hell they want. Yes, they're an authoritarian, oppressive regime, but as long as they keep petroleum prices down, the US will sell them whatever they want.
So it's one oppressive authoritarian regime selling to another oppressive authoritarian regime.
Yeah, but it's Russia and China that we should be worried about.
I'm talking about the US Supreme Court here.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I got it. You sick of hotels?
Speaking of OPEC, I mean, the fuel price in the US is about $4.30 a gallon, which is, I think, around $1 a litre when you convert it back to Australian terms. And they complain about the price of gas over here, as they call it. And it's really confronting now, the number of large trucks that everyone's driving. Like I'd say 50% of the cars are F-150s and above, and Dodge Rams and all these things. And like the good side is all the car parks are much wider here, so you can just drive a normal car in and open all 4 doors and get out. Not have to worry about hitting the car beside you, and the freeways are really wide. But the bad thing is when Bubba pulls up behind you and flashes the lights because you're going too slow, and it's all about testosterone.
And he's probably packing. I've been meaning to ask you about petrol prices, actually. I had this in my notes a few weeks ago and forgot to bring it up because of, your extensive knowledge and background. By the way, I meant to tell you this too. You remember the breakfast we had after your birthday the next day? Chrissy had the best chat with Joe Barberis, and she's been raving about Joe ever since. She's completely infatuated with Joe. And
Joe has this crazy baby face way of doing that with women. I've never been able to understand how.
Well, apparently they had this big, deep and meaningful conversation, and he's like apparently going, reevaluating his life, and he's into philosophy, and he's thinking about what does it all mean, and saying, he spent his whole life just working and making money, and now he's realizing, well, that was a waste of time, and he's reevaluating it. Anyway, they had a really great conversation. She was really, really impressed with Joe, and doesn't often, I think her expectations when she meets,
my friends,
middle-aged white former corporate executives is they're going to be of a certain mold, and she was blown away by Joe. But anyway, getting back to petrol prices, a month or so ago, I remember filling up the car one week and it was like $2 a litre. And then a week later, I filled it up and it was $1.65 a litre. I'm like, how
Right.
can the price fluctuate 25% in a week at the Bowser? What's going on? Can you explain that to me?
I can't. I mean, it's a lot. I have heard that the retail margins grown dramatically in Australia, so there could be a price war on that would explain part of it. But no, I can't. I haven't been that close to what's going on in the oil industry.
Okay.
I
If
thought
anyone
I thought
listening
OPEC
can,
have raised its prices recently, so I would have expected that to pass through to the Bowser pretty quickly.
yeah, I don't know. The prices are all over the place here. They go up and down like a bride's nighty week to week, and I can't figure it
Well, that would
out.
be a price war. That's what's going on there. Yeah,
Right. I
someone's
thought they
trying to get
colluded
market
on
share.
price.
Sorry.
I thought they all colluded on price.
Oh,
Didn't you
I'll
tell me
defer to
back
my
in your
lawyers on that
day
one.
they used to all get together and have little conversations about price fixing, and you said, "Yeah, I'm not getting involved in that."
Industry meetings, yeah,
Yeah,
health and safety meetings for the industry.
that's what they call them.
Yeah,
Safety of our profit margins.
yeah,
Um,
right.
well, we're watching the new season of Succession, which I know you're not into, but it's
No, I am.
amazing.
I am. I've loved it,
Oh, really?
but I
You got
haven't
into
seen
it?
the new season yet. Yeah,
Oh, you got into it. That's good. Well, the new season, this is the last season, is really, really good. Yeah, just every episode is magnificent. I love it. The new season of Barry. Have you watched any Barry?
I watched the first episode and haven't persisted with it.
Didn't like it? Okay.
Well, it was okay, but just I got distracted and watched something else.
Right. Well, I think this is the last season of Barry too, but it's really good. Been watching that. And I'm nearly finished book 2 of the Three Body Problem series,
Yeah,
the Dark Forest or whatever it
like
is.
Dark Forest problem. Yep.
Yeah. Where I think the bit I've been reading the last couple of nights is when the the human it's like 200 years in the future, and the massive human fleet of 1,000 battle cruisers goes out to meet the whatever they call it, like the
Mm.
teardrop thing that they think is a
Yep.
peace offering from the Trisolarians, and it just wipes out the entire fleet in like
Yeah.
20 minutes. And they're like,
Yeah.
oh shit. The humans were all cocky about how much they'd advanced in 200 years, and they thought they'd scared the shit out of the Trisolarians, and then it wipes them out in 20 minutes with one tiny little foot-long device it sends out, and they have to reevaluate. And
Yeah.
the
And
the traitorous captain who, just before all this happened, took control of a ship and flew it in the opposite direction out of the solar system when everyone thought they were absolutely assured of victory, is now being hailed as a visionary and a hero
yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
he expected to be strung up as a traitor, and now they're all think he's a hero because he was like, listen, just in case this goes really badly, there should be at least one group of humans that aren't in the vicinity when shit goes down. And turns out he was right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Contingency planning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's that's the good part about the series of books. It's certainly not Earth centric. We are not the masters of the universe in that one.
Yeah. I'm enjoying it. It's interesting.
Oh, and the physics get better and better as it goes through, which is what I like about book 3 as well.
Yeah. You keep telling me that,
Mm.
so I've been pushing through to get to book 3. Meanwhile, I've been reading a lot of stuff on China. And something else I can really recommend for people if they haven't seen it already. In 2015, Oliver Stone did a 4-hour documentary of interviews with Vladimir Putin. If you haven't seen it, and I hadn't seen it up until recently, I highly recommend it. I'm a big fan of Oliver Stone's interviews. I don't know if you saw his one he did with Fidel Castro, when he was still alive, was great. The one with Chavez was when he was still alive was great. And this one is amazing. It's really, it'll give you a perspective on Vladimir Putin that I don't think people that will probably challenge your expectations of Vladimir Putin. So, yeah, I think it's worth watching. Like we get a certain perspective of Putin from Western media and Western politicians. Worth just watching this 4-hour interview with him. Stone got heavily criticized at the time for doing it. Why would you go and talk? And I listened to an interview with him, Stone, on Lex Friedman's podcast, which again is about a year old. They did it just after the Ukraine invasion started, the war started. And Friedman asked him, well, why did you go and interview Putin? Why do you interview the guys? He goes, because, seek first to understand is the number one rule of journalism in his book, and filmmaking as well. He said, all my films are about trying to understand these people and what makes them tick. And you have to go and talk to these people and ask them, well, how do you think and why do you think that way? Why do you do what you do? Which I agree with. In all my history shows, I've always taken that approach. If I'm talking about Stalin, I'm like, okay, well, you have to assume that he's a rational actor, or Hitler. Why are they doing the things that they're doing? What was their thinking? What was their justification? Whether or not you agree with it is beside the point. I think it's important, particularly for an historian, to try and understand their mindset. And anyway, I highly recommend that. And we're reading some really good books on Xi Jinping as well, and on Mao, and on the Chinese political system. We're reading a lot on that, and how China's political system works. Yeah. So every time I'm reading the 3 Body Problem books, I kind of feel guilty that I should be reading. I really struggle with reading fiction. I always have. Like, I feel like I'm slacking off when I'm reading fiction.
Yeah, right.
But it's good for the soul, I think, too.
It's a guilty pleasure, and you'll learn more about physics in the 3rd book.
Yes, I could just go read a book on physics, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, look, and yeah, going back on what you said, Oliver Stone is a bit like the John Pilger of the current years, isn't he, really?
Yeah.
He's done some interesting things after making a lot of Hollywood movies.
Yeah, he's devoted a large part of this stage of his life to going and doing very unpopular projects that he knows are going to get lambasted. And he's very, if people are interested too, listen to his interview on Lex Friedman. Like, he's very critical of the US geopolitically, and the US media and journalism in the US, and the biases in US journalism. And he makes a lot of very cogent points. But I respect the fact, like, it's one thing for a nobody like me to criticize US politics and the US media, but this guy had was a very successful screenwriter and then director and producer, and could have just done that for the rest of his life and rested on his laurels. But he decided to go and do these very unpopular projects that he gets just constantly criticized for. And he talks about how after he did the Putin one, I think he went on Colbert's show to talk about it. And he said, I should have just walked up and left. Like, Colbert's interview was antagonistic, was designed to be, clickbaity, antagonistic. The same way that he says they cover Putin in the US media, if they ever deign to interview him, the interviews are antagonistic from the get-go. And then Colbert's interview of Stone about the Putin interview was antagonistic. Yeah, it's just really, he's very, very disappointed and dismissive of the US media landscape in general, and it's the way that it approaches these things, which I tend to agree with, but maybe that's my cognitive biases.
Yeah, no, I concur. It's been very vanilla reporting of the issues, and very much blue team, red team. whether you're watching CNN or Fox News, you get different versions of what's going on.
Yeah. And even the blue teams versions of things tend to come from a certain, particularly if they're talking geopolitically from an American perspective, and even domestically, it all comes from a fairly right of center bias.
Yeah,
like even
I always laugh when I hear Republicans call it Democrats, lefties.
Yeah,
from the it's like no.
Yeah, or the left leaning media. I go, really? When was the
Yeah,
last time you had a good conversation about the values of socialism on MSNBC?
yeah.
No one talks about socialism really on MSNBC or on CNN or in the New York
Yeah.
Times or whatever you
Or as you
want to call
say,
it.
no one spoke to Chavez when he was in power, or any of those people down there. Or I mean, Oliver Stone started off his career with was it Nicaragua was one of his early movies, which was fantastic.
Yeah, with
Belushi.
James Belushi.
Yeah,
Oh, James Belushi. No, James Woods. Wasn't
James
James
Woods. Yeah,
Woods.
but Belushi was in it too, I think, from memory.
And now James Woods is a massive Trump supporter, conspiracy theorist, COVID conspiracy theorist, crazy right winger. How are you catching up with David and Edna while you're in Toronto?
I'd love to, but they're actually over in Saudi Arabia, believe it or
They're
not.
in
So
Egypt. Yeah, they're now in Saudi Arabia, are they? I saw they were in Egypt.
yeah, so they were in Egypt, but I think Edna's got a job with part of her company working over there in the Middle East. So they're out of town, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, I would have loved to catch up with them.
Yeah. Oh, well. I was going to say to pass on my best. Dame Edna Everage, Barry Humphries passed away this week. You a Barry Humphries
Yeah.
fan?
Oh, I am, yeah. Big time. Love. He put out another autobiography last year, I think, which I loved reading, or recently anyway. And I read one about a decade ago or so. So his writing is great. And I love the stories from the early days about, speaking of Hitler, about, getting on a tram in Melbourne and combing his hair over to one side and reading Mein Kampf and getting more and more agitated and worked up as he went along in the 1950s in Australia.
Wow, what a shit
Yeah.
stirrer.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, what an amazing career. I was saying to Chrissy last night, I don't know anyone, I can't think of anyone who has done a character as long and as successfully as he did Edna. Like Adventures of Barry Mackenzie, etc., was like in the early 70s, and I know he'd been doing Edna for a few years before that. So 50, maybe 60 years of doing that character consistently, plus Celeste and Sandy and all the other characters as well. But that's an astounding amount of time to just do one character. I don't know anyone in any medium that's done a character that long.
Yeah, no, I can't think of one. And we actually saw him in Toronto when we were here, so 5 or 6 years ago. He was doing Edna Everage still, and he must have been, well, he was 89 when he died, so he must have been 82 or something at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, still performing, still well loved by the audience, even though he just piled into them every chance he had. In fact, that was half the show, just asking people where they lived and then asking more penetrating questions about their house and how they lived and just
really,
twisting it against them. Yeah.
What a great intellect and comedic sensibilities he had. I know there's a little bit of stuff in the media here about his conservative views on transgender issues, etc., but which I wasn't aware of. And quite frankly, I tend to separate the person's personal politics and their artwork usually. Try not to.
Yeah, look, I agree. I mean, I read some of those articles as well. I mean, I knew he was politically conservative, but I kind of always put him in the basket of someone who was, skewering that kind of arty-farty, pseudo-intellectual type that was around in the 70s in particular in Australia. And some of his characters were, way back were about those kinds of people. There was, one about the school teacher who was always applying for arts grants, and yeah. So I don't know if he was that conservative politically, but he certainly didn't like the sort of wankers that were around in that kind of hippy dippy era. So yeah, that's where I'd put his political views, I think.
And someone else who passed away in the last week was my old mate, Father Bob.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, another life well lived. I think, certainly, if you base the outpouring of love and affection for him that has been evident right across the board in the media and online. I think that's probably a sign of a life well lived. For the people who don't know, I did a podcast with Bob. I think 2006 I started it with him. It was his first podcast, and we did that for a few years. I moved to Brisbane in 2008 and didn't get to see him very often after that, but got him on Twitter in 2007 too, which ended up being a good platform for him. He had quite a sizable following on Twitter. I used to go and run his food bus down there back in the 2000s. We'd go out on Sunday nights and do food and coffee for the homeless, but also the people living in halfway houses and that kind of thing around South Melbourne. And it was always fun doing the podcast too with Bob. Like, obviously a Catholic priest. I'm a lifelong atheist. And yeah, he came and was at the premiere of the film in Melbourne as well. He came up on stage after the film and, was one of the panelists with a couple of religious scholars from the film. So he was always a big supporter, and my sense with Bob was I always believed he was an atheist. My sense with Bob was he, like other men of his generation, was sort of forced to join the church through lack of options. Irish working class. I think he was in an orphanage. Basically, that was the place where you went in the 40s and 50s. I think he started off as an army chaplain. And, I think a lot of those guys, I remember there was another guy like him up in Brisbane I used to know quite well, a Catholic priest who ended up being defrocked for basically being inclusive of doing homosexual ceremonies for weddings. Before it was even legal, he would do like unions in the church, and the church kicked him out for being inclusive of the LGBTQ community here in Brisbane. But I remember doing a podcast with him years ago, and he said his story, and I think this applied to Bob as well. He said, you just go into it when you're a young man and you go to seminary and you don't know any better. You were raised a Catholic, you just go into it. He said, then you wake up one day and you're like 35 or 40 or whatever, and you go, I don't believe in any of this bullshit anymore. But what do I do? I've got no training in anything else. Right. I have no skills. The church owns your life, basically. You live in the refectory, they pay for your car, your house, and so, he told me that he'd made the decision to just make the best of a bad situation as best he could, try to do what good he could in the community from that position, and try to do as little bad as possible. And my sense with Father Bob was always that he would never get into it with me whenever I tried to talk. It was funny thing about Bob is he would always just shut down any religious questions. Who cares? They're all just stories. And then he would always go back to, what would the founder of the firm do? His one principle was, look, if Jesus is real and Jesus was here today and Jesus was the guy that Catholics like to believe that he was, what would he do? That's all Bob cared about, was how do you be a good person right now? He didn't care about theology or getting into debates about whether it's real or not real or God exists or not. he would just shut all of that down. Not interested. Just what can you do today to make a positive difference in the life of the poor and the downtrodden? That was his shining light, his golden rule. And I respected that. I thought he was annoying as hell to try and work with. Probably had ADHD. I remember once we were trying to set up an early version of the Father Bob Foundation. I went and had a meeting with the guy. The guy who was like the managing director of Macquarie Bank at the time. Can't remember his name. Who had tried to work with Bob over the years. Bob actually gave me his number and said, "Call this guy." And the guy said, he goes, "Just make sure you know what you're getting yourself into." He's like, Bob's lovely guy, lovely, good heart, but it's like herding kittens, man. Like trying to herding chickens, one of the two. Like trying to get him to focus on anything or do anything is just a nightmare. And I get it. Like when you've been a Catholic priest all your life, you probably don't have a lot of managerial skills, or you haven't had to develop a lot of discipline in terms of task lists and focus or whatever, right? You're not
Well, if you
forced
did have
into that.
managerial skills, you became the bishop.
You became George Pell, right? Yeah. Who he had no time for. He used to, even before George Pell's troubles became public, Bob used to just, the oak room boys, or the ivory room boys, the mahogany room boys, he would call them. He had no time at all for the bishops and the cardinals and the upper echelons. He thought they were all a bunch of wankers. And anyway, interesting guy, interesting life. I haven't seen him since the premiere of the film in early 2020, but we used to keep in touch on Twitter and Facebook and that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, the analogy with his life is played out, particularly in the States, where, just in New Orleans, we drove past an underpass of the I-10, and there was, I don't know, 20, 30 people sleeping out, homeless under the freeway overpass. And then you drive back towards town, and you pass 10 churches on the way, and they get bigger and bigger as they get closer to town. You think, gee, you could probably sleep a lot of homeless people in these big marble edifices.
Mega churches.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know do you ever listen to my series talking about how that all got started in the Cold War show?
No.
It's fascinating stuff. How Christianity and capitalism came together in the US in the 40s and 50s. Really, I drilled down into it over a long period of like a mini series. It was fascinating.
Was it tax deduction reasons?
No, it was fighting communism reasons. So, FDR in the 30s and the New Deal, and there's a rising interest in the US in socialism and communism in the 30s. But even just at a level of legalizing unions and welfare programs and that kind of stuff, reining in some of the more extreme behaviors of large businesses, but and right down to a genuine interest in Marxism and Leninism and the success of the Soviet Union as it was perceived at the time. Russia's role, or the Soviet Union's role in fighting the Nazis in World War II. And big business in the US was very terrified. The rich were very terrified about if people in the US, start to adopt socialism, what it was going to mean for the rich and the wealthy, and curbing their power and curbing their ability and their wealth, and pushing for more redistribution of wealth amongst the people and that sort of stuff. Big business in the US hated FDR, even though he was a blue blood, and kept telling them, listen, I'm your best line of defense against the pitchforks, right? A little bit of, give up a little bit, or they'll come for you with the pitchforks and they'll take it all. They hated him. And so they put together these organizations, the wealthy guys in the US, to try and align themselves with the churches over there to associate capitalism with Christianity, and they basically said to the churchmen, well, you know, the socialists are all godless atheists as well. If socialism takes root in America, it's not only bad for us, it's bad for you. So they formed an alliance, and then they went looking for pastors who would aggressively preach Americanism and capitalism and Christianity as a combined ethos. And then they found this one guy who actually ran a church in LA, who was the first guy to get on board. Can't remember his name off the top of my head. But they basically just started giving him tons of money, and he set up this massive organization to recruit pastors around the country to become part of this new anti-communist movement. And the thing was, the ones that got on board got shit tons of money from the business leaders in their communities to build the mega churches. And of course, then the people sort of started flocking to the mega churches. So the pastors that got on board got more money, drove, like this guy in LA literally had like chauffeurs and Rolls Royces and lived this in like Hillsongy type level of like wealth and luxury that he lived in. The pastors who didn't get on board, you know, basically saw all their congregations leave. And the employees of the business men in these areas were encouraged to go to the same church that the boss goes to, the owner of the business and the management, because they want to see you at their church on the weekend. So there was all this pressure on people to join these mega churches where the pastors were aggressively promoting American capitalism as what Jesus wants. And it was this deliberate strategy, and all the documentation is there. There's been a lot of really good books written about it, of how America sort of capitalized Christianity and that's when In God We Trust was added to the coins, which hadn't existed before. The Pledge of Allegiance became a thing, which was invented to sell flags to schools, by the by. Where the presidential prayer meetings happened under Eisenhower. He was pressured to start that. There was this whole series of events during sort of McCarthyist stuff to stop the spread of socialism and communism in the US. Fascinating to me, that whole thing. And now today it's so embedded in the US, it's very hard to unpick, you know.
Mm. Yeah, very much so. Excuse me. Sorry, had to clear my throat. Yeah, the In God We Trust being put on the notes and coins. That's the amazing story, I think.
Particularly when the founding fathers were, you know, mostly very negative towards Christianity and warned everybody about, you know, the adoption of any sort of one religious denomination or religious affiliation. It was, you know, built into the Constitution. Jefferson had his own version of the Bible where he cut out all the stuff that he thought was bullshit and just left in the stuff that he thought was real, and there was hardly anything left. I mean, you go back and you read about the founding fathers, you know, they were deists mostly. They believed that nature and God were the same thing, and it was all, they believed in natural laws and non-intervention of God and all that kind of stuff. And to go from where it was, you know, in the 1770s through to where it is today is sort of a fascinating journey to unpick.
Yeah, separation of church and state existed and then now doesn't exist.
And they were adamant about it in the early days, but it's sort of gone by the wayside. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, TK.
Thank you. Good to talk.
So you'll be back in the country next week, but probably not in time to do an episode next week, right? Well, I'll do a filler episode next week.
I'm traveling Monday and Tuesday. and then we lose a day, so I won't get back until probably Wednesday, I think.
Then you'll need to recover anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks, but I will put out a show next week. I've got a plan for it, which I think will be fun. So have a great last week in Toronto. Safe travels back, TK, and I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
All right. Thanks, Cam.